So one more time, without further ado, Nir Barak, the floor is yours. You will be talking about the urban agency in a centralized state and give, I guess, a little bit more broad perspective, a more general overview of how the situation in Israel looks like. Nir, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks to Joanna and to Kim for this panel. My name is Nir Barak. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University, and I work in the fields of political theory, urban politics, and environmental politics, especially in the last couple of years on the changing relationships between local and central governments. And in the next 10 to 12 minutes, I'll try to set the stage or set the background to discuss about urban agency in Israel, understood through the lens of municipal autonomy and changing city-state relationships. And the central puzzle or the central argument is straightforward. Israel is a highly centralized country de jure, yet municipalities increasingly develop autonomy, municipal autonomy de facto, and that matters for possibilities of power diplomacy. And this is how I'm going to unfold the argument. So let's start with the background. The baseline is that Israel has a unitary political system with high degrees of centralization, fiscal and political. Municipalities operate in governance environment where the default assumption of everyone is that the center sets the priorities politically, legally, and administratively. The local only applies or implements central decisions. To see this fiscally, cities are largely disempowered. You can see on the graph on the left side that the percentage of local tax revenue decided by the central government is 95%, the highest in OECD countries, and the subnational government budget on the right-hand side is only 5% of the GDP, lower than all comparable countries, federal and unitary of different sizes. Centralization is not only fiscal, it's institutional, and it's based on several structural constraints. Israel's municipal legal framework is historically rooted in a model that dates back to the British Mandate, colonial rule over this land, over this country, and it's carried over into a system where municipalities are structurally subordinated to central government, especially through the Ministry of Interior, which controls almost everything that goes on within municipal governments. This is reinforced by legal and political tools that the central government have that can restrict local initiatives, such as centralization, re-centralization, approval of procedures, limiting access to data, and applying budgetary constraints and various oversight mechanisms. And this is well known in other countries as well. And as Israel is becoming more authoritarian and leaning away from liberal democracy, we see more application of these restrictive tools. Now, it's worth mentioning that this has been long in tension with decentralization norms like the European Charter of Local Self-Governments from '85 to Israeli reform proposals that have been in 1981, like the Zanbal Committee, that recommended to move towards greater decentralization. It hasn't happened since 45 years have passed. So the diagnosis is that limited municipal autonomy is not new, but what is new is the trajectory of change under stress. To flesh this out, it brings us to the central conceptual tension at the heart of this matter, which I think echoes similar debates worldwide. Is the city primarily an administrative subunit of the state, a service provider, an implementation arm, or is it a self-governing demos with a distinct democratic legitimacy and public authority? Now, for me, the philosophical answer is dialectic. It's always both. And the critical political question is how to balance these competing goals. I want to reflect on Israel and say that the formal political architecture or institutional design is one that leans strongly towards the first, meaning the city is an administrative subunit of the state, but empirically, the second is becoming more difficult to ignore because Despite all this, despite the centralization, despite the constraints, etc., city-state relationships are changing for several reasons. So let's get into that. The first has to do with trust in political institutions. This is a graph of the Jewish population in Israel, and it shows the degree or percentage of the population exhibiting high and very high degrees of trust. So can you see my mouse? The very bottom line is the parliament. Then, sorry, this is the political parties. This is the parliament. This is the central government. This is the High Supreme Court. The highest line up here is the president, and high and stable above everyone since 2021 is the local government. The same dynamic plays out for Arab population, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, or Arab Israelis, however you want to term it. It has different political sensitivities to it. In all cases, the only difference is that Palestinian citizens of Israel express higher degrees of trust in the High Supreme Court because it's the court that secures their basic civil and political rights. So it's quite obviously the reason. This has been accelerating because over the last couple of years, Israel is largely unstable. 5 rounds of election between 2019 and 2022, and then entered an intense period around what we see as a judicial overhaul starting from January 2023. If we bring into this various degrees of crises, right, like the COVID-19, or in May 2021, civic unrest and violence on the verge of civil war between Jews and Arabs, and of course, the ongoing war since October 7th in the region has been places where the local governments have exhibited their competences, their high degrees of responsiveness. They have shown that they're more closely aligned with the values and preferences of their citizens, and certainly more than the central government. So all this background leads to a changing perception of local government's role in public life. And I think, and we still have to check this empirically, whether it also changes civic expectations. I mean, as citizens, that our local government will solve problems that are ongoingly neglected by the central government. So just to briefly summarize, high centralization de jure, but changing circumstances, instability and crises that pushed governance expectations and public legitimacy towards the municipal level. And I want to show how this plays out in practice. But before that, just very quick definitions of theory. I want to distinguish between 2 forms of municipal autonomy. The first has to do with administrating and planning capacities independent of intervention by the central government, meaning municipal innovation, where policy is lacking or where we have a policy lacuna. Sorry about this. Okay. A second type of autonomy is political contestation of power by the local government, and contesting the power of the central government, basically a power dynamic between local and central government. So we'll start with municipal autonomy type 1, municipal policy innovation and entrepreneurship in case of regulatory vacuum. And we have continually been seeing this for at least since 2018, where local governments are pushing themselves or moving into policy fields that are not commonly associated with them, like supervision of nurseries, like recognition of LGBTQ rights, climate policy, environmental policy, green building codes, high-rise maintenance, etc., etc. And in all these cases, we notice policy lacunas, matters neglected or insufficiently addressed by the central government, and someone will always step in, because we know that there are never vacuums in political life, either the NGOs or the corporations or the local governments. And by very creatively doing so, municipalities enhance their autonomy by carving out creative local policies despite all the constraints imposed upon them. They're becoming more and more policy producers, creating tools and regulations for problems unsolved or unaddressed by the central government. This is just to show how this plays out in climate and environmental initiatives, but I think that Shirley and Kim will talk quite extensively about this. The second form of autonomy, that's political power vis-a-vis the central government, is becoming more and more noticeable. Cities act against central agendas or in direct tension with them. And as I mentioned before, as Israel leans more towards authoritarianism and distancing itself from liberal democracy, we see more and more local resistance. And examples include opposition to central planning schemes, or struggles over separation of state and church or state and synagogue, to Shabbat-related governance, especially with what has to do with public transportation on Shabbat. Imagine that we don't have public transport over the weekends, or regressive interventions in education, especially in all that has to do with gender equality and LGBTQ rights and tolerances. And this is where we can see an escalation mechanism, that cities, the figure that you see here on the right, are all the cities that openly declared that they're going to oppose regressive policy, regressive educational reforms. So I want to say something about an escalation mechanism. We see that cities who are extending their capacities in municipal autonomy of the first type are also gradually more and more playing in the second dynamic of contesting political power, meaning that first we can see that if the state, when cities address innovative policy fields and the state does not push back, we can see that municipalities can transform or take action that can transform into a power dynamic over political authority, legitimacy, and basically contesting the boundaries of jurisdiction. And I think that Noam Bar-Levi is going to talk more about this later on. So coming to the limit of my time, I'm wrapping up. What does all this imply for power diplomacy? First, we should describe Israel as a centralized de jure with growing instances of municipal autonomy, types 1 and 2 de facto. Second, this enhanced autonomy is often power taken rather than power granted, and it becomes a precondition for power diplomacy, because cities are more likely to act internationally or globally when they have already built some governing capacity at home. Third, power diplomacy can be read as a response to centralization. For type 1 autonomy, this global activity is often a capacity-seeking and capacity-enhancing kind of tool, meaning cities can look outwards for expertise, templates, benchmarks, and implementation tools. And I think that we're going to hear a lot about this from Kim. And the type 2 is still, I can say, still in the making in Israel, but it conceptually suggests another pathway. And it's that global engagement can be seen as a source of legitimation and as a leverage in vertical disputes with the state, for example, by the Israeli form of liberal mayors pairing with the Pact of Free Cities in East Europe. It didn't happen yet. It might happen. For those opposing our current government, it's a sign of hope. And I hope I've set the stage sufficient for the rest of the panel. I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nir. A round of applause to you, virtually, but you can feel, I guess, our good energy that is sent towards you. Thank you very much for making this overview. And now I would like to go to Kim. Kim will give us a little bit more of a case study of Tel Aviv and the municipal autonomy that she writes her PhD thesis about, I guess. So Kim, please, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much. Okay, so, and also, Yana, thank you so much for organizing and giving the platform for this webinar. So I will present you today a paper which is part of my PhD, which is part of my PhD work, where my main question in the PhD is how do cities' action in global politics reshape their power dynamics with nation states and vice versa? And to explore this, I decided to focus on environmental and climate transnational municipal networks, TMNs, since the environment is one of the most common areas for cities to network and collaborate globally. More specifically, this paper asks, how can cities, in this case Tel Aviv, Jaffa, use urban diplomacy around environmental and climate issues to boost their autonomy and even influence national policy? So we have two big strands of research that are usually treated separately. On the one hand, there is a lot of work on municipal autonomy, exploring how cities gain more political agency vis-a-vis their nation states. And on the other hand, there's been a lot of literature on cities in the global arena and on how and on urban diplomacy. But what is missing, and this is the gap I try to address, is research on how those two dimensions affect each other. How does urban diplomacy shape municipal autonomy, and how does municipal autonomy influence the way cities perform globally? So the framework I'm proposing builds on Keck and Seeking's boomerang pattern and adapts it to municipal dynamics to capture these interrelations. So Keck and Seeking's original boomerang pattern, which is the left side of the presentation, describes how advocacy networks, such as NGOs, turn to global arena when they face resistance at home. So the global arena supports them in two ways. First, by applying top-down pressures on the state, and by providing knowledge and tools that boost bottom-up pressure. So I argue that cities can act in a very similar way. When there is a policy vacuum at the national level, for example, around climate issues, cities turn to global city networks for guidance, tools, and inspiration. And since global actors are already putting pressure on states around global challenges such as climate change, cities can then reinforce this pressure from below by adopting global policies and influencing peer cities domestically, and over time by tacitly shaping national policy. So in a way, the boomerang pattern is a framework that links between municipal autonomy and urban diplomacy and describes how global and local interactions can shift power dynamics within the state. So there are key conditions that make municipal boomerang dynamics possible to start with. First, there need to be certain level of municipal autonomy, plus connection to the global arena and some political room for experiment. Second, we need strong leadership at the city level with a normative commitment to global values. And third, there must be a trigger, usually a policy vacuum at the national level, where the state fails to act because of lack of political will or institutional capacity. So now let's dive into the case of Tel Aviv Jaffa. I wish I had more time to elaborate about this, but I don't, so I'll just say this. I chose Tel Aviv Jaffa as a case study because it is quite different within the Israeli landscape. Although Israel is a very centralized state, as Nir mentioned earlier, Tel Aviv, as a large and wealthy city, enjoys a relatively high degree of autonomy, but this is also, as Nir mentioned, it's an autonomy that it takes for itself, and it's often represents a more, and Tel Aviv is often representing a more progressive urban counterpoint to the national government, which today is dominated by right-wing populists. And more importantly to our discussion today, Tel Aviv is active in urban diplomacy. It is a member of several urban networks, and it sees this membership as a real asset. And in my research, I studied Tel Aviv's relationship with C40, which Tel Aviv is a member of since 2017. So this brings me to Tel Aviv's autonomous climate policy, which often moves ahead of Israel's national climate action, which has been described as lagging to non-existent. Just today, for example, we learned that Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, under pressure from the Trump administration, is preparing the ground for a possible withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. So anyway, in this vacuum, Tel Aviv took the lead independently, and it drew on global city networks such as C40 or 100 Resilient Cities. It also took part in the C40 Climate Academy in Rotterdam, and when it went to this meeting in Rotterdam, it even invited external partners into its delegation, including representatives from the Ministry of Environmental Protection. In 2020, Tel Aviv published Israel's first climate adaptation plan as part of C40 deadline 2020. And after that, it started guiding other cities in Israel. And by 2022, national ministries published a guide for local climate action. And interestingly, this guide strongly reflects the C40 inspired approach Tel Aviv had already put in place. So in order to examine how does climate-urban diplomacy as practiced through TMNs enable Tel Aviv to boost its autonomy and influence national climate policy, I studied policy papers of both the city and the state and conducted interviews with political and administrative municipal and national actors. My analysis is built on 3 pillars: municipal autonomy, urban diplomacy, and boomerang dynamics. Together, they show how Tel Aviv operates independently, leverages global networks, and eventually generates indirect pressure on national policy. So when we look at the first pillar, municipal autonomy, 3 themes stood out strongly across the interview. First, leadership. Many interviewees emphasized that Tel Aviv's independent approach. As one put it, we're not waiting for the state. When you want to do it, you just do it. The second theme is standards. Several interviewees noted that the city often moves ahead of the state as it aims higher than the state. As one official explained, when they, the national government, updated the standards, they basically caught up with us. But we have already moved 2 steps forward, introducing new categories they hadn't even considered. The third theme is challenges. Many interviewees mentioned how Tel Aviv had to cope with obstacles coming from the state and explained how the city manages to move forward, not thanks to the state, but in spite of the state. As one interviewee noted, there is nothing Tel Aviv can learn from the state, and often it's actually the other way around. Not only there is no guidance, there are actually obstacles being put in our way. And when we turn to the second pillar, urban diplomacy, 3 themes stood out from the interviews. First, global positioning. Interviewees stressed how important it is for Tel Aviv to gain international validation. You get the impression that Tel Aviv is actively seeking global status and legitimacy by aligning itself with cities outside of Israel. As one interviewee argued, we now have international validation that we are doing, or that what we're doing is based on what has been improved. This is how the plan should be built according to international standards. You're a global city, you have a vision, go ahead. The second theme is C40 inspired learning. C40 was often described by interviewees as a network that gives Tel Aviv opportunities to exchange ideas, get guidance, and motivation to act. As one interviewee stated, C40 offers inspiration, dialogue, a space for consultation, and also a target to aspire to. Very ambitious goals and well-structured organizational framework. And the third theme is centralized constraints. Several interviewees emphasized how domestic centralization eventually limits Tel Aviv's performance, ambition, and the potential of using C40. As one interviewee vividly described, C40 is like an off-road vehicle sitting in the parking lot beneath the building, and you never take it for a drive. It's an incredibly powerful tool, and we're not leveraging it enough. This is a national issue, not just about Tel Aviv. The third and final pillar, which is the boomerang dynamics, capture how Tel Aviv's global engagement loops back, amplifying its influence on both peer cities and national policy. 3 themes stood out from the interviews. First is projection. Tel Aviv positioned itself as a kind of guide or model for other municipalities, actively shaping its C40-based approach to inspire application. As the vice mayor stated, I think we need to be a sort of projector and guide for Israeli cities. The second theme is responsibility. Tel Aviv's sense of duty came up in many interviews. Tel Aviv sees itself not just as advancing its own interest, but as carrying responsibility to help other cities and even the state. As one interviewee said, Tel Aviv is always happy to teach. It understands its commitment, its responsibility in a way that I find truly exceptional and inspiring. It knows it has knowledge, and it understands that this knowledge needs to be shared. Tel Aviv's engagement with C40 is tied to its sense of national responsibility. And the final theme is what I call tacit influence. Even when not openly acknowledged, Tel Aviv's policies tacitly shape national frameworks and peer city strategies, leaving its mark in ways the state doesn't always recognize. As one interviewee said, you can look at the other cities' adaptation plan, you can look at the national guide for municipalities in the accelerated program, and you can see our work there. And now this is where things get complicated. While Tel Aviv frames itself as a national leader, we can see that national actors see things differently. While the municipal narrative is that Tel Aviv fills national voids with bold local action, the national perspective is that municipal action depends on state support and regulations. For example, one governmental interviewee told me that the claim that Tel Aviv doesn't need the state is inaccurate and that the municipality works with us, we discuss things together, they even learn from us. While the municipal narrative is that Tel Aviv leads peer cities, the national perspective is that other cities are equally or more advanced. While the municipal narrative is that Tel Aviv influences national policy via global engagement, the national perspective is that national policy is self-driven and influence from Tel Aviv is overstated. And lastly, while the municipal narrative is that Tel Aviv is stepping in where the state falls short out of responsibility, the national perspective is that Tel Aviv leverages state initiative to boost its global image rather than to address local policy gaps. As the former Minister for Environmental Protection told me, the government published calls for proposals to prepare climate plans. Thousands of municipalities applied. It starts with the low-hanging fruits, the municipalities that want it the most. It also serves a bit of PR for them for their membership in the C40. So to wrap up, these competing narratives reflect a Rashomon-like divergence, different truths depending on who tells the story. But rather than resolving this tension, it might invite us to reflect on how power, legitimacy, and leadership are constructed differently by cities and states, but also coexist. Tel Aviv clearly acts as a forerunner, but outcomes depends on state cooperation. Tel Aviv needed the national guide for a wider diffusion of the lesson it learned from C40. So beyond tension, we also see the shared responsibility of the city and the state. So city leadership and state cooperation need to coexist. And we can see that the boomerang dynamics play out not through open confrontation, but through a tacit influence. Tel Aviv shapes national policy indirectly, often in ways that doesn't fully acknowledge at the time. This shows how municipal influence can be powerful, yet overshadowed by broader state narratives. And finally, it seems that municipal boomerang is most effective in soft policy domains, like in sustainability, public health, or housing. However, in areas with sharper values conflicts, such as migration, same-sex marriage, and other human rights, the dynamics may look a bit different. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kim. Great presentation. Thank you. For presenting us the situation of Tel Aviv and Jaffa, and presenting also some part of your PhD thesis. This is also very interesting, what you told us. I remember from the conference that we met that it was really wonderful. So I'm not surprised. Anyway, we have also Shirley Lukin in this part. Shirley will tell us a little bit more about the cities as well as the networks, making some kind of bridge here between first part and the second part of today's webinar. So Shirley, we see your presentation and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you very much for having me here, and Kim and Joanna for inviting me. So today I'll be speaking a bit more about Also, this is the third chapter of my PhD thesis, and I really come more from the side of the networks, but today I'll be speaking specifically about the third part of my PhD, where I also examine Tel Aviv. So I hope to not repeat what was previously said. And I'm really asking here specifically why cities join overlapping climate networks. So as Kim talked about, and I'm sure many of you know, transnational municipal networks have become really prominent in global climate governance. They're also a voice for local governments in the global fora. And as Kim has showed, they also bring local governments to actions and sometimes motivate states towards their climate goals. At the same time, both practitioners and city officials really do recognize a significant overlap between these networks. And this is something that I examined in previous parts of my PhD, and this is something that really does come up when you're speaking to many of the network officials and city officials. But the consequences of this have not really been examined. And specifically, I'm interested in understanding why do local governments join overlapping networks when there are significant costs in terms of human resources, in terms of time, and sometimes also in terms of financial resources in joining these networks, and especially if they overlap in their governance functions and what they actually supply cities. So I'm jumping straight to the theory, just in terms of our time. And as Nir, so I have two main theoretical expectations. The first has to do with what I call strategic overlap. So I won't go over what Nir presented beforehand, but there is a sovereignty deficiency with cities, with local governments, right? So local governments are dealing with a lot of global problems, and at the same time, they're not able to fully address them because of many national and internal regulatory situations. And one way that I'm claiming that they might be trying to overcome this is through joining these networks and having reputational benefits and legitimacy. So coming from the literature of regime complexity, which asks why do states join overlapping institutions, one of the reasons that that literature talks about is that states join overlapping institutions to pursue self-interest in global arenas and to increase external reputation and legitimacy. So in that sense, I'm saying that cities might also be joining for overlapping networks for this reason. So at the mayoral level, we can think that maybe this benefits their reputation, also of the mayors themselves, and also just pure repetition of the commitment and of what they're trying to gain, as well as just having more access to different audiences, even if these networks are overlapping, and many times you see similar audiences. And at the practitioner level, this external legitimacy might also increase internal pressure and motivation. My second theoretical expectation has more to do with the structural with the structure of the municipality. So municipalities have different structures ranging from centralized to fragmented, and this is also true in how they deal with their international relations. So in some cases, cities have an international relations department and deal with all their networks through that. And in other cases, it's really fragmented and it's across different departments. So this might lead to unintentional overlap, just lacking because of horizontal management. So this overlap is unclear and officials don't know about this. Or it can also lead to deliberate overlap where we see more bureaucratic agency and internal politics, which each department or unit of the municipality defers to a different network. So in this sense, I am expecting that municipalities with fragmented or decentralized governance structures are more likely to have overlapping network memberships, just due to lack of coordination. And I'll jump through to the research design. So specifically in this research, I'm focusing on two case studies, Buenos Aires and Tel Aviv. And this is based on 34 interviews I had also with city officials and network officials. Here, specifically for obvious reasons, I'm going to be giving all the examples from Tel Aviv, not Tel Aviv-Yafo, sorry, so we can learn more from this. So the first initial findings, when just purely trying to understand how local governments see over this phenomenon of overlapping TMNs. So all interviews agree that there is some level of overlap between these networks. At the same time, these networks are aligned in terms of policy prescriptions. This is really interesting because we see that although they're joining different networks that maybe are talking about the same things, they're not really offering different arguments or policy prescriptions. At the same time, even though most of these officials do recognize that there is overlap, they do make some type of differentiation, for instance, saying, oh, this network is more technical versus this gives us more political clout, or saying, oh, this is more general purpose and this is more specialized. They also vary in their level of engagement, and as Kim talked about, and this is true also for Buenos Aires and also for Tel Aviv-Yafo, they really prioritize their membership with C40, and that's where most of the time goes. Whereas membership with other networks that might be still overlapping, their level of engagement ebbs and flows throughout the years, and this is something that's very clear from both cases. At the same time, we do see that these officials complain about additional workload. So even though they're saying, oh, well, there is a difference between these different networks, they do complain that there is a cost to joining these overlapping networks, and it usually comes out in terms of the time of communication and joining different webinars or different forums, or also in terms of needing to report a lot of their data and just gather a lot of their data, which takes a lot of time. So in terms of my first expectation talking about strategic overlap, first of all, we see that both cities talk about membership with these networks as a broader internationalization scheme or specific interest in bettering their climate policy. So specifically, Tel Aviv-Yafo in the past few years has invested a lot in transportation and mobility and walkability of the city. And we see that they've joined different networks that talk about green mobility, and which has helped them fund and carry out some transportation experiments. At the same time, and as I'll talk about before, a bit later, even though Tel Aviv sees their networking as one part of their internationalization kind of strategy, it's not very clear what the overall strategy is. In terms of external legitimacy, we see that this is definitely something that came up a lot in the interviews. And I promised one city official that I'd use his metaphor. He spoke about joining TMNs as being a member of a prestigious sports club. So it's not that easy always to get in, and there might be a significant cost. But once you're in, you have the right friends, you have the right gear, everything is very nice, and you can be proud that you're part of this club. The question is whether you actually utilize that and actually do something with that. So, and get in shape, which is an interesting, I guess, metaphor. And we also see that a lot of these officials talk about the importance of the mayoral reputation on the global stage and what this actually does when it trickles down inside the city, and also for the mayor's feeling of responsibility to carry through. And this is something that also trickles down, as I said, in the internal legitimacy. So here, one official talked about how Ron Huldai, which is the mayor of Tel Aviv, he committed to planting 100,000 trees by 2030. And he says the mayor also follows up with me and asks me, how many trees have we planted this year? And this is also something that he talks to different departments within the city that aren't as committed to climate change. They really straighten up because the mayor committed to this publicly. So we see that this external legitimacy really does trickle down. And this also is true in terms of reaching different populations. So specifically in the case of Tel Aviv, we see that that one official gave the example of being able to do more projects in Jaffa, in Yafo, that has an Arab, Palestinian, depends on how you define this or what you use, that he was able to reach that population much easier because he had the global name of a network behind him. In terms of my second expectation, having to do with the fragmented or decentralized governance structures. So here my expectation did not follow through. And we see that membership in overlapping networks is widespread regardless of governance structure. So both municipalities with centralized and decentralized governance structures are members of overlapping networks. What they do vary in is in the level of the awareness of this overlap and the depth of engagement with overlapping networks. So specifically, Tel Aviv operates under a more fragmented structure, where engagement with TMNs is really divided between individual departments. So in some cases, such as C40, membership was initiated by the mayor, but in other cases, different units within the municipality just reach out and join other networks. What this results in is a much more narrow view of the municipality's overall TMN engagement and internationalization engagement, and it really limits cross-departmental collaboration. So this is a reoccurring theme across interviewees, and this was really clear when I asked each interviewee, okay, what networks is a city part of? I got really different answers. This wasn't the case in Buenos Aires. At the same time, not all interviewees view this as a negative aspect. So some argue that this allows departments to focus on networks that are much more relevant to their specific mandates. But this does presume that officials have a clear understanding of each network's potential utility and how they can benefit different city divisions. It also really depends heavily on the goodwill and motivation of municipal officials. So as one official observed, the currency in the public sector is credit and influence. So in this sense, this fragmented structure relies much more on personal initiative and recognition to foster cooperation across departments and really gain utility across these different networks. So thank you very much for listening to me, and hopefully we'll hear now more from the practitioners.
Thank you very much, Shirley, for presenting this paper. And also a part of your thesis. It's really great to have people around the world who really do the research on para-diplomacy, city networks as well. Now, I know that we have very limited time, but if anyone has any question, a short one that would like to be asked here in the public, I see Tomasz hand. So Tomasz, please, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. A short question to Nir and Kim. Could you please explain what is the link between municipalities and central government? Meaning, are there any channels of official or unofficial communication? So, meaning to what extent, for example, a central government can use cities as a tool of foreign policy, and other way around, there are any channels that really mayors can influence central government, for example, using this boomerang model in, for example, human rights issues. Thank you.
Short answers, really. And I guess that some of the practitioners will refer to your question, Tomasz, as well later on. I guess so. But Nir and Kim, please.
Kim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so no, I just wanted to say that I think some of the practitioners will answer this, but as far as I'm aware too, they're not really there are no official platforms for information to move from cities to central governments. Usually it's the other way around. Central government in Israel mostly sees municipalities as foot soldiers of the central government. So they mostly believe that they need to give information to cities and teach cities. I don't think they fully understand that it could also work the other way around. Yeah.
Nir, would you like to add something?
Very shortly, I agree with Kim. I think that there is a small distinction because there's a thin layer of more powerful cities that are fiscally more autonomous, more liberal-leaning, more globally oriented. And there, I think that the central government does respect their autonomy, or it does not hurry to pick a fight with a stronger city like Tel Aviv Jaffa and other cities in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. But basically, the broad picture is subordination.
Thank you so much. And now the question from Marinana and later on from Deborah. So Marinana, please.
Hey, can you listen to me? Yeah, I'm sorry for my weird camera frame. I have many questions, but first of all, I'll address just one of them. Congratulations, Nir, Kim, and Shirley. It was very nice to listen to you, to know more about the Israeli case. My question is, are there reactions from the central government that you can access to this type of power diplomacy that bypasses the central government? Can you see that? Do they react against it, or they just let it go?
Who wants to answer?
I think Noam will answer this later, but I think not enough. I think cities in Israel, I think they feel like they don't have the strength because the government makes them think that they don't have the strength to perform differently outwards in the diplomacy field. But on the other hand, I don't know, when it comes to, for example, LGBTQ rights or human rights in this sense, I think cities will, especially cities like Tel Aviv, but I think also Beersheba and other cities will try to show that they're different than the state in some aspects, but I'm not sure they're doing it enough.
Thank you so much, Kim. And now let's move to the question of Deborah. Please, last question now in this row.
Hello, thank you all for the presentations. I think that my questions relate to Marinata because I'd like to know if there are any cases of conflict between global and central government that were brought to the Supreme Court. And if it does, if so, what was the ruling?
I'll take this one. There were several that went to the Supreme Court. The most fierce of them has to do with the separation of church and state regarding the religious character of public space. In Tel Aviv, there was a very expressive case where Tel Aviv municipality decided to open or to regulate commercial activity on the Shabbat, on Sabbath, during the weekend. There was a persecution or a legal debate in the High Supreme Court led by the Minister of Interior, saying that he can overrule this municipal decision. But since he did not follow the procedure that does allow him to do so, since he didn't meet the time criterion, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the city's regulation. Tel Aviv has the mandate to regulate its commercial activity on Shabbat. However, the governmental response to the ruling by the High Supreme Court was to legislate a law called the Shabbat law or something like that, basically saying that any municipality who does apply new regulations to having commercial activity on the Shabbat has to be approved by the Minister of Interior. There have been 5 municipalities who did so explicitly, and their bylaws have been rejected by the Minister of Interior. However, this is the formal reality. Behind or under the radar, several municipalities in different cities are opening and regulating their public space on Shabbat. And as long as there are no big public upheavals against this, I can say that the reality in various municipalities is more liberal than more open-minded than as formally described. Sorry, it was a bit of a long answer.
No, absolutely not. Thank you so much, Nir, for this answer. I see that Deborah answered on the chat. So, okay, thank you very much for your scholarly perspective on the situation in Israel and giving us a better perspective on how the situation looks here. But now I will move forward to the second part of our meeting, the roundtable discussion of practitioners. And we have here a great round of really practitioners, people who do municipal city diplomacy in real terms. I would like to welcome Ms. Shiri Steinhardt-Sella, the head of the International Relations Division, Federation of Local Authorities in Israel. It's great to have you here. I would like to welcome Mr. Nir Barak, the Director of International Relations at the Mayor's Office of the Jerusalem Municipality. Welcome.
No. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We have also Ms. Shani Ora-Dotan, the International Director, Beersheba Municipality. Great to have you here with us. And also Mr. Noam Bar-Levi, the CEO of the Israel Forum of Liberal Mayors, which is, as far as I know, a kind of a new forum, a kind of a new network. So I would like you to highlight and tell us a few words on the forum. So thank you very much to all of you for accepting the invitation for this webinar. It's great to have you here and listen to your thoughts as well. If you allow me, I will stop the recording of this meeting, and we can